morning. I'm Kim Mcclary, President and CEO of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. Thank you also very much for joining us. And thank you for your ongoing support of our programming through your contributions, by becoming a member of the Council Town Hall, and by offering to do a sponsorship of our live streams. We're providing these live streams for free as a public service, so we can't do this without your support. As you're enjoying today's program, please stand by. At the very end of this program, we'll show you a quick and easy way that you can help make a contribution to keep us going. For those of you who are new to our live streams, we'll be taking questions in about 20 minutes. There's a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions. Jessica Deganzik, our Vice President of Events, will be managing your questions during the Q&A portion of today's program, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. Thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's program, a conversation with House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, moderated by politics professor Dan Schnur. Dan, we're so happy to have you back moderating, and Congressman, it is a thrill to have you back as a speaker. I'll turn it over to you now, Dan. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. And thank you very much, Representative Kevin McCarthy, for joining us today. I know the original plan had been for you to be with us in person before the shutdown came, so we're grateful for you for taking the time.
Thank you, Dan. It's good to see you again. And to the whole council, thank you for giving me this opportunity. A special shout out to Beth Lowe. I know she's invited me a few times. I've been able to talk to you, have a town hall meeting, and then when you're back in DC. And so with the world of COVID, this is a new way of doing it. So hopefully we're able to reach a few more people.
Okay. So just before we get started, one quick note to our audience. I mentioned to you last month when we had Representative Adam Schiff that I had known Congressman Schiff since his time in the state legislature in the 1990s. Representative McCarthy and I have known each other for many years also. And so I'm proud to have both of them as friends and moderate in as nonpartisan and even-handed a manner as possible. And so, Kevin, I'm going to ask you this to start with. When your staff and I first talked about this program some weeks ago, we talked about COVID, we talked about the economic recovery, we talked about China and Iran and other issues on which you're working. One thing we didn't talk about was the U.S. Postal Service. And so I'm wondering if, before we get into the other range of issues that I know you're looking forward to discuss, can you give us some clarity on what is going on with our mail?
Good point. And the sad part is, it seems almost everything we do today gets politicized. It doesn't matter. I mean, what we watch on TV, where we get our news is politicized from every person. No one has to fear about the Postal Service not having enough money. And this is where, with social media not being together, where they'll take a picture of something and make it sound like something's happened. So some people may have saw a picture of mailboxes being moved. That happens all the time. I mean, I'll give you an example just to be bipartisan. During the Obama administration, they moved 14,000 of those. They do it by different growth than others. The post office is losing money, so they always want to modernize. We have a new postmaster who's a very smart individual. What he's done yesterday, which is very helpful, he stopped any changes on anything. So it's kind of that not bipartisan, nonpartisan view. Nothing will change between now and the election, so no one can say it's one option or the other. I just read a letter from an 18-year commissioner, a Democrat appointed by Bill Clinton, says there's plenty of money there long into August of 2021. We even did in the CARES Act the ability to get another 10 billion into them if they have any problem. They got 14 billion right now. So really what's happening with the Postal Service, and we're going back on Saturday, is more about politics than anything else. If everybody voted by mail, that's about 150 million. They can handle 450 million. So there's no question if more people vote by mail, they'll be fine with that. We've watched that before. The real question when it comes to voting by mail isn't the Postal Service. It'll go to the elections office. Are the people who voting, are the ballots accurate? We've watched what happened in New York. 3 months later, we've watched 1/3 of them get thrown out. So I think the post office is getting caught up in the political debate, and that's the last place the post office should actually be, because there is no qualms or no problems there.
So just to follow up on that, I think one of the reasons that so many of our members are so concerned is because just as this debate was beginning to get more visibility, the president last week said that he thought that additional money for the post office in the COVID relief package should be withheld because that would prevent mail voting from taking place on the scale that many have called for. Now, you and Senator McConnell have both made it clear that you do believe that that money ought to be in the budget for mail voting. So maybe you can help us make some, establish some clarity of what the president was trying to say.
All right, let me be clear. We've already passed the CARES bill, which provides more money for the post office. I watched all the commissioners. There's plenty of money for the mail. The problem that President Trump has is the difference between mail ballots and absentees. And this is a legitimate argument, because what happens if you changing because of COVID, in California, we have absentee ballots. Probably more than half of the people vote absentee. I vote absentee a lot of times. You can sign up and be permanent absentee. We watched in LA, they've had problems because when you apply by absentee, it means you're already registered, you're filling out an application, they're checking your signature, they know it's going to you, they have an updated record. LA County recently got sued a while back where they had 1 million more people on the rolls than they actually had. They hadn't cleaned up their record. So now they're having to clean up the record. If you change that and you go to an all mail ballot, you just mail everybody a ballot who's on the record, and they haven't been updated. That's when you get a problem for some fraud, because you don't have signature checks, it's not updated. And I think that's where the president lies. I mean, he voted this week by absentee. He's just concerned with mail-in ballots, not with absentee ballots. And I think he confused when he was making the message across about the post office. He's one that wants to make sure all the money is at the post office, and they have more than enough money going into well into next year.
So if I understand right, where you draw the distinction, and it is not between absentee and mail voting, because I've seen those terms used interchangeably in a lot of circles. What you're doing is drawing a distinction between people who request an opportunity to vote by mail versus sending out a ballot to everyone proactively. Is that the distinction?
Yeah, that's the clear distinction. In the world of COVID, more people should be able to vote absentee. I have no problems with that. I just want to have a check and balance inside our election process, that you've got an honest election, because we just had a few people plead guilty down in LA that they were out filling out for homeless people and others. We've watched in New York where they went to an all mail ballot. They're still counting the ballots. A third of them didn't work through. And if you're going to do an absentee ballot, we should have the ability to make sure our vote counts, where you can trace it and follow it. I know in California, they changed the rules a little bit. They made it a little more lax about who can turn your ballot in. That became a discussion in the last election. Look, the one thing I love about our elections, in the history, we usually go inside our curtains and no one can dictate how we vote, and we do vote in privacy. The more that you're forcing that someone else can pick up your ballot, they can know how you vote. I just want to make sure we have a check that if I sign my absentee, that they check that absentee along with my voter registration to see that I'm the same person, that someone's not voting my ballot.
Okay, so I know our audience is going to have more questions on this a little bit later, so we'll move on in just a second. But one last question on mail before we go on to other stuff. You said a minute ago that you did think, particularly in the time of COVID, that additional mail voting was a good idea for those concerned about exposing themselves to the virus. California, as you know, and this is the distinction we were talking about a minute ago, is sending a ballot proactively to every registered voter. There's several other states that are sending ballot applications rather than the ballots themselves to every registered voter, and therefore the individual has to send back the application in order to get the ballot. Is that an alternative with which you're comfortable?
Yeah, it makes it better, because remember, just in the last 2 years, LA got sued because they had 1 million more people on the rolls than they actually had. Because what happens in the elections office, think how often people move. They don't remove you from the election rolls. So they could have 4 or 5 people still living in the same location. You get 4 or 5 ballots going in. If you mail everybody an application, You're going to clean your rolls up at the same time. They're going to have to send them back in so you know that this is a legitimacy individual. But if you're just putting, it's like holding a bunch of ballots and putting them on the sidewalk and anybody can pick them through if you mail everybody a ballot. You don't know who's picking them up. If you have some type of check, whereas I applied from an application, you have my signature on record for my voter registration, and they check that to see I'm the same person.
Speaker Pelosi is calling the House back into session this Saturday to vote on to call a vote on whether or not an additional, I believe, $25 billion, excuse me, should be spent on the Postal Service. Are you voting? Will you vote for that proposal, or will you instruct your caucus to vote for it or against it?
Interesting. How can we instruct anybody to vote for it? No one has seen it and no one has read it.
Okay.
Hasn't been through committee. Then this is where, not to play partisanship, it's purely partisan to be called back. I actually think we should be called back, but not for this. We should be called back to deal with COVID. We've got schools, some that are opening and some that are trying to plan to open. So what are we doing to help make these schools be safe? We got businesses trying to open up. What are we doing about a tax incentive to let them write off all that preparation they're doing? We've got small businesses wondering if they can open again when government has shut them down. That PPP program that provided funding to give to their employees was so successful, but it only went for 2 months. Could we extend that further? We've got small businesses and schools and governments wondering if they're going to get sued. Should we do liability protection? You got people who are unemployed who actually got a bonus, another $15 an hour from the federal government per week, along with what California gave them. So they were getting $24 an hour. Well, that $15 an hour has run out. Is there ability to find some common ground in between that? Maybe it could be a little less and they could still get a bonus. That's really what we should be called back for, but to be called back for the Postal Service that has already told us they have enough money, who you have a postmaster yesterday who just said he's going to have no changes between now and the election. I don't know why we would vote on anything that wouldn't change any of the outcome. It's more political nature and why we're coming back.
Okay, so just to clarify there, Speaker Pelosi has said that she wants Congress to deal with a COVID relief package before late September, when you come back to deal with the broader budgetary questions. How quickly would you bring Congress back into session to deal with COVID relief?
Well, she said as Speaker, and she's got all the power, she said before August that we would not leave until we dealt with it. But apparently that's not true. So now she postponed it, let everybody leave, and let us come back. Look, I understand Congress at times has a problem making deadlines, but I've always understood, be it in the state legislature, be it in Congress, anywhere else, once you get to the deadline, people start paying attention more. And if they thought they were going to be able to leave and you keep them there, I think they'll make their decisions a little sooner. So I would have never let us leave. I think the COVID is too important. I think the economy is too important. And this is where the Speaker and I have had differences of opinion. In every COVID bill we've done, there's times where Speaker Pelosi has delayed it. In the very first bill, I was trying to get in there a liability protection for 3M. 3M makes masks, and they make different style masks. You know, some that you'd use in a doctor would use in a surgical place, and some that they would make in business that would still be safe. Well, they were afraid to sell that to the public because they were going to get sued. So we wanted to do liability protection, which would have given us 30 million more masks right off the bat. We couldn't get that in. It wasn't until the second bill. When we were dealing with the CARES Act, Schnur said he was ready to go, and Speaker Pelosi said no, and she held it up, and we got more money for the arts. I didn't think that was a reason that we should hold it up because I thought it'd just be on COVID. When the PPP program did so well, we watched the money running out. Secretary of Treasury, about a month early, requested more money. So it wouldn't need a new bill. There was no new language. It's just add more money to a program we already voted for. She famously on that late night show opened up a refrigerator and said no, and she held that up for another week. I don't think in this time, I think this is the moment in time. I know we're going to disagree on some things, but we could find common ground when it came to COVID on things that we can agree to, and let's do those. The other things that don't deal with COVID, leave those aside for another day. but let's not delay longer, because what do you do when people are out of work? What do you do when people are trying to pay their rent and they're not getting the check again? I think it creates new problems in the financial markets for us.
Let's talk a little bit more about that COVID package, because as I'm sure you knew before the rest of us did, the Associated Press reported this morning that Senate Republicans are moving forward with a COVID relief package. Republican Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri has said that the legislation will include $300 for weekly unemployment benefits, and he believes that those can last through the end of the year.
That's extra to what the state already provides you in unemployment.
$300 on top of the state payment.
$1,200.
It also includes some additional money for education and for virus testing. It does not include a renewal of the one-time direct payments of up to $1,200 for taxpayers and dependents. I don't know if this is yet a bill or a more informal proposal, but are you familiar with what the Senate Republicans are proposing, and are you comfortable with it?
I was talking to Leader McConnell's office this morning. I am familiar with what they're trying to do. It is an opportunity when we're back there to work. I have another difference of opinion with the Speaker. I believe Congress is essential. I mean, through every crisis that we've had in this country, from yellow fever to the Civil War to World War II to 9/11, Congress met. We even met when they burnt the Capitol down. I don't think we should be staying home. I don't think we should be voting by proxy. I think we should be working. I do think what people would call this a skinny bill. These are all things that the majority of everybody in Congress has agreed to. Senate has different rules. It takes 60 votes. And so it's kind of like the things people have differences of opinion, they didn't put it in the bill. So at least let's do the things that we have agreed upon and get that out so people don't hurt any longer. And I think that's an approach to go. Now, if that gets denied, kind of like police reform, where they won't let it come up for debate, that becomes a problem. So you have to have 60 votes to even get a debate on this bill.
And we had Senator Tim Scott on just a couple of weeks ago talking about the police reform bill. I'd like to come back to that later if we have time. A couple of particular points about the COVID bill and the differences between the two parties, both what the Speaker is proposing and what we've heard now from Senator Blunt. As you know, I teach these days at UC Berkeley and at University of Southern California and at Pepperdine. And I'm proud that I not only have 2 former students working on your staff, but 2 on the Speaker's staff as well. And I brag about them all equally. One of the biggest differences between the 2 packages is the amount of funding for education, both K-12 and higher ed. How do you see those differences getting resolved? And what do you tell students and parents about how you feel the best way is to resolve the differences between you and what the Speaker is calling for?
I always like to write bills based upon data. But if I take the Democrats' bill that they passed the House, that was $3 trillion. I didn't vote for that bill for a number of reasons. I didn't think it had it. In there, they had about 100 billion. In the Senate proposal, the Republicans actually had more for schools, 105 billion. Now the request has gone higher. And sometimes if I get numbers wrong, it's because I'll have meetings of the 4 leaders and my mind might come to whatever what they're requesting. Now they're requesting 400 billion. I'm not sure where that number comes from. I would like to do something for the schools because I know the schools are opening right now. I know the Republicans offered more than what the Democrats had passed. And it almost becomes as similar to a game because somebody else offered more. Now I have to ask for more. That's not a reason to hold the bill up. I would take where people have agreed, let's put those together. Let's see if we can get to places that we disagreed and find common ground. It's kind of like the unemployment. When we crafted the unemployment, one size fits all doesn't work because the unemployment you need in Bakersfield is probably different than in New York City. And so, but we were in such a rush because COVID was coming, we wrote it and had that extended to the 31st. How we wrote the PPP program, we learned after the fact we needed to give more flexibility to small business. We came back and found common ground there. And really in that CARES Act, we had Republicans and Democrats together working in committees, kind of crafting it based upon their expertise. I thought that was a great mode. The difference with this bill is it's leadership only to negotiating. I think that's a mistake. I think every member should apply, and I think those members in their expertise areas, let them work together, kind of what we did on the CARES bill in the Senate side. We did Republicans and Democrats alike, just focusing on that section. You work to that, and then if we could come together, we brought it all into one package, and that worked really well. We found common ground on both sides. There was, as you teach this government, no one side gets everything that they want. Our government is designed to find compromise, but right now we're just finding reasons not to go forward. And I don't know if that's because less than 80 days we have an election, but we're in a different time with COVID. That should not be a part of it, and that's why police reform shouldn't be a part of that either.
So the California State Legislature, where you served as Republican leader before being elected to Congress, passed a budget that our Governor Gavin Newsom signed that predicates a huge amount of state spending on education, on healthcare, and on other issues. That spending is predicated on money from the federal government. Was that a mistake?
Well, I don't know. I remember when I was growing up, I'd watch Popeye and I'd eat a hamburger today and gladly pay it for Tuesday. I don't think that's how I would run something, especially if I was running a state. I would manage it with what I had, and if something else came in, I'd add on to that. I think that's better planning from that standpoint. But look, I think the federal government can get together. I think if the speaker would call us back. Look, the reason why you take a break in August is because Washington, D.C. used to be a swamp. It's hot, it's humid, but they still have electricity, unlike California. They don't have any rolling blackouts. So I would still make members go back there and work. I think they'd get the job done.
Speaking of rolling blackouts, and I know that you are not the White House press secretary, but rather the Republican leader in the House of Representatives. The president said yesterday that in California, Democrats have intentionally implemented rolling blackouts. Now, as you know from your time in the state, those decisions are made by the California Independent System Operator as opposed to elected officials. Is the president's categorization a fair one in your opinion?
Well, I think if you take what he says, he's probably saying the policies of the Democrats have caused rolling blackouts. And last time we had something like this, as you remember studying history, for the first time we recalled the governor. And in California, I love this state. I know the potential of this state, but I come from a region that supplies probably a great deal amount of electricity to all of California. We're number one when it comes to solar. We're number one when it comes to wind. We're number one when it comes to oil production. We got geothermal. I have nuclear just outside. It's kind of all the above. But in California, we pay on average 40% more for our electricity than other states. And now when we're sitting in a state that is having a heat wave, and you can't guarantee whether you're going to have electricity. In my own town, the water filtration for the cities, some of them are going to have to be shut down. So there's an ability to have solar, but at the same time as you shouldn't have to turn it off when the sun goes down. There's the ability to have wind, but you shouldn't have to turn it off when the wind won't blow. So you need all the above, and especially if we're paying more than everybody else, but you can't guarantee it. I think the president's right about those policies. Those policies are not delivering for those in California in a time when they need it.
In just 1 minute, I'm going to turn this over to Jessica DeGanzik because she has, I'm guessing, piles and piles of questions from our audience, and I'll step aside. But before I step aside, I have one last question I'd like to ask you.
Sure.
Michigan State University announced this morning that they were shutting down fall classes. Notre Dame announced yesterday that they would delay the start of fall classes. University of North Carolina made the same announcement. The Pacific 12 and the Big Ten athletic conferences have both decided to delay all fall sports, including college football, which is of tremendous cultural and economic import in a lot of states around the country. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 have decided to delay their fall sports schedule till January at the earliest. Other conferences, other schools in other parts of the country are going forward. Given that there is additional information indicating that young people are more susceptible to the coronavirus than we originally thought, what would your position be on whether or not college sports, specifically college football, should or should not attempt to go forward this fall?
Well, having never had the athletic ability to play college level, but high school level football, you got a short time frame for eligibility in college. Either you give them another year of eligibility if they cannot play, and if they don't want to play, I wouldn't. But I would look at the ability to still be able to if they can. If they find it in a safe manner, if they have the ability to go, I would give them the option because, and I do this based upon speaking to people who played it. And Anthony Gonzalez, who I served with, who was one of the top draft picks, was very a conscientious member. He said that teamwork, the things that he saw that it helped individuals who didn't have a home life and others to keep them together, that it changed their way of life too. Ability to make that happen. And when I'm looking at therapeutics, when I'm looking at vaccines, I know tomorrow is going to be better than today. So, and I know what it means to people at the same time. And I don't think one person should say, especially when these people are adults, that they cannot do it. Give them all the risk, tell them all the options, and let them choose. But if they choose not to, do not punish them for that choice. Give them another year of eligibility. And if that's the capability of doing, let them try.
Okay. And so on behalf of our audience who are USC, UCLA, and CSU Bakersfield fans, you are not calling for the shutdown, but are you saying on an athlete by athlete basis or a school by school basis or a conference by conference basis that decision should be made?
Well, you're going to have somebody else to play. So at least USC and UCLA should play each other. Just for the good of Southern California, have that one game. Maybe they play each other 3 times, just so those who want to play could be able to do it. It might not be easy. It does affect on the record ratio. Younger's different. These are healthier people. I wear what is called a whoop. I got everybody on my campaign staff a whoop because it measures your respiratory. So at any time, if the respiratory goes up, don't come to work. I think within the next month or so, we're going to have some therapeutics that can keep you safe for a number of months. I think I look at how promising these vaccines are. I think this year you will have a vaccine. So to me, as you've always known from me, my cup is always half full for the same reason why I became a Republican with Abraham Lincoln. In the middle of the Civil War, not knowing whether our nation would stay together, he built the Intercontinental Railway. He knew what tomorrow would look like. And this idea that we're going to quit everything and shut down, I don't think it's the best mode. That's my belief. I want to make sure people are safe. I want to practice safety, but I want to continue my life. And that's my choice. I want to give people that choice. I don't want government to tell me I can't do anything. I'm fine with wearing a mask. I'm fine keeping social safe distance. I wash my hands constantly. And I want to be respectful of others as well. But I also want to have my my opportunity to carry my life out.
That sounds like someone who'd like to watch college football this fall, if possible.
If it's done safely.
Okay, I'll also note for the record that Representative McCarthy announced that he became a Republican along with Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, which is not yet been made public.
In a family of Democrats, if you ask me why I became a Republican, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, all 3 portraits I have in my office. And if anybody challenges me on my belief, I was not born into this party. I chose to be in this party based upon I'm proud of what Abraham Lincoln stood for. I'm proud of what this party has stood for. And yeah, I went against what my family grew up in because I believe in it. And I believe that people can have difference of opinion and not hate one another, that people can debate ideas. And you know what? When you debate ideas of other sides, you'll find there's a lot of common ground because we're all Americans. And I yearn for those days again, that people don't hate one another just because they have different thoughts. I think that's one of our.
But you did not mean to imply that you became a Republican simultaneously with President Lincoln.
But if I was alive during that time, oh yeah, I would have been with Abraham Lincoln and the Union, and I would have stood with this nation.
Okay, on that historical note, Jessica, I will turn over the remainder of the program to you and to our audience. Kevin, thank you so much.
Remember, Dan, that was the first time the Republicans took down the Confederate flag, 1865.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We have a number of questions, so I'll get to as many of these as I can. The first one is, what do you intend to do to make the Republican Party more inclusive for people of diverse ethnic backgrounds?
That's a great question. And the best way you could do it, you could be inviting. But the best way you could have is show, oh, sorry, my chair's moving. Is show everybody that people have the ability to serve. If we're really a big tent, then we should look like what we believe we are. And this is interesting. We're going through elections right now, and so we're going through primaries. I'm very proud of people who are running for Congress as Republicans. Do you realize, and we're not all the way done with our primaries, we have more than twice as many women who are going to be the nominees as Republicans running for Congress than last cycle. We have more women running than at any time. We have more minorities, more veterans. Just last night in Florida, you watched what happened. And I think this is expanding beyond. Now, do we have a lot of room to grow? Yes, we do, but I'm proud of the effort that we put in and the opportunity that we have watched. Let's take, for instance, just California. We've had one new special election in California from the last election. And for the first time in 22 years, a Democrat seat flipped to Republican, a seat that's LA County Ventura, that was held during COVID when all mail ballot. You had a first generation American, Mike Garcia, who has never run before, win in a seat that Hillary carried by a majority. The Democrats won by 9 points just a year and a half ago, and he won it by 10. That's exciting when I sat on the floor and introduced him. To think that his father came from Mexico dreaming of his child to have a better life. Mike goes to school locally down there in Santa Clarita, gets nominated to the Naval Academy, excels and flies jets to defend the nation that he loves, and now he's serving them in Congress. That's just the start of the diversity. Or you go to Wesley Hunt in Houston, happens to be African American, went to West Point. Or Nancy Mason in South Carolina, Charleston, first woman ever to graduate from the Citadel. Or Ashley Henson running in Iowa, graduate of USC. I mean, all across, we have more women than ever and more minorities running. That's the best way to expand the party.
Thank you so much. We've had a number of questioners ask about Marjorie Greene, who just won the primary in Georgia. They said that she will likely win a congressional seat in November. What do you think about that, and how do you see her role in the Republican Party? And should the GOP be distancing themselves from her?
Well, as you know, everybody gets elected proportionally from, we do redistricting, and they get elected from their district. I've had discussions with Marjorie Greene. She won that primary, and she recently came out and denounced the Q organization, whatever beliefs. I do not agree with their beliefs at all, and she denounced those. I believe everybody has an opportunity from that standpoint, and the discussions I've had with her, I think she'll continue to work to show people that lots of times in press today, they imply something different. She's a small business owner, and she'll be given an opportunity. But we will not, if you watch my actions as leader, we've had one member who said things that I think went against what the party of Lincoln would stand for. I removed that individual from committee. The party does not decide whether you serve in Congress. Your district decides whether you serve in Congress. The party gets the opportunity to decide what committees you sit on. And we've been very strong to take action when we think we have it. Unfortunately, this is where I have another disagreement with Speaker Pelosi. I've watched Congresswoman Omar say anti-Semitic actions, even about me personally, and no resolution. When they wanted to bring it to the floor, they had to water it down. Or I watched another congresswoman on her very first night say she was going to impeach the MFer, and no punishment taken there. And that's where I think mistakes are made, especially on both parties. The constituents get to decide whether you go to Congress. It is the parties who will decide where you serve.
Thank you so much.
I wish the Democrats would do the same Republicans have been able to do in the last Congress.
Thank you. What is your sense of the mood of Congress to deal with Chinese aggression in the South China and Philippine seas?
You know, I think the China issue is very, very important. We should learn from a couple different issues, especially with COVID. First, the lying to the world and the thousands of lives who have lost. We could have probably contained this in China if they would have allowed our scientists on. The continuing of flights around the world, but domestically shutting them down. The aggression and the movement in the South China Sea. We watch what happened to Hong Kong. I mean, think for the last year what's happened in Hong Kong, that millions of people would go out on a Saturday, bring an umbrella, stand in the rain for the idea of freedoms of America. And this is where I believe America is more than a country, that we are an idea. And now they're getting shut down. This is where I asked both parties to work together. I went to the speaker more than a year ago and I asked if we could create a bipartisan committee on China. Because I think it's very important that we have one policy about China and that we could talk about all the issues, from IP, from military, from the future, from education. She agreed to it. It took me about 8 months, and we were going to actually name the committee. It's going to be the same number of Republicans and Democrats. And the night before we were going to name it, the Washington Post, we'd already interviewed, already wrote the article. They backed away. I don't know why, but I think this is wrong. So I've gone forward with my own task force, and I invite Democrats to join with me because I don't want it on one side. But we need to have a serious discussion about China, our stockpile, and our supply chain. China has too much control over that. And that's one thing within PPE we should have understood. And I think this is where there's a great divide between Republicans and Democrats. I truly believe, and I've said this many times, that the Democrats have a China problem. They're not willing to stand up to them. And that's a problem for America. And I don't think that should be a partisan issue. I think we should do it together and have a real discussion with a real policy.
Thank you.
If I can follow up on that one, Jessica, because I think it's a fascinating point, and it's clearly a very different geopolitical landscape than the one that's existed for many years. Ever since Nixon's first visit in the 1970s, for the better part of 40 years, Republican Party orthodoxy, and in fact, the conventional wisdom among the leaders in both parties in this country, was that by opening up China economically, that would lead to great stride forwards in terms of human rights, in terms of treatment of its own citizens, in other related issues. That's clearly not the case now. What I'd ask, Kevin, is going forward, do you see us returning to a point where the U.S. is interested in, once again, a more collaborative economic relationship with China, or do you see these other matters in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, the Muslim population in the northern part of their country? Do you still see these issues as being so intractable that we are headed for a new Cold War?
I don't know that it's a Cold War. Remember, Nixon opened it up based during the Cold War about Russia developing up. We created the 3 communiques with China. You had Kissinger. I think if you talk to him today, the whole belief during the Clinton administration that if we took them into the WTO, they would become more democratic, open up to more freedom. No, they took an economic advantage, but they haven't changed. They've actually clamped down on freedom. If you're in China today and you're Chinese and you want to buy an airline ticket, you can have the money. That doesn't mean that they're going to sell you the ticket. They're going to give you a score based upon your social score, what you have said on Twitter or others, what your family has said, where you're going, the way they treat other people of Muslims, faith, and others. And coming after what's happened with COVID. You watch what they're doing to Australia today. Watch when they told President Obama that when they built these islands that they weren't going to weaponize them. Well, that was a lie. Or what about the IP that they have stolen around the world? Or what about trying to push Huawei at the same time as selling PPE to countries and not telling them about COVID? Think about what Japan is doing about moving that supply chain out. They're almost in a world of trying to bully a situation. I think this is a window not about America and China, but the world and China. That I think people have now woken up that they're not there really to supply you money within Africa and others to help, but it's actually to gain an economic gain there. And do they have the rule of law? Do you have the ability to participate coming out? And I think this is where our allies and others are going to look at things differently. That, you know what, they are not becoming more democratic. They're actually taking advantage of a situation to crack down on free speech. Remember, 30 years ago, 1 million people, college students, went to Tiananmen Square. They built that statue, the goddess of democracy, right? It looked a lot like the Statue of Liberty, and it stood directly across in the Tiananmen Square from that picture of Mao. And then we watched that young student stand in front of a tank, knowing we'd never know his name or know where he lived or where he was buried, for the whole idea that he stood in front of that tank, for the idea that he craved freedom. And why did they crave that? For the same reason those in East and West Berlin knocked down a wall, for the same reason the shipyard workers in Poland rose up. It was the beacon of America's freedom of individual rights that was more powerful. And I think that will always win out. But at this moment in time, when the power of where China has become, I think it's more than an American policy. It should be all those in the free world who should work together, because individually they're going after countries of Australia and others. And that's why one policy from America, standing with the rule of law and not being afraid that it gives somebody a political game. I mean, I just read a story, most of you people probably read it from the FBI, that China is now playing in our elections, that they really do want one side to win over the other. And that could go directly into our economics of the future. So yes, this is why we should have a very open, honest debate about China.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump in here again. Can you please defend the Republicans' lawsuit trying to upend the Affordable Care Act, especially during a pandemic?
Well, the lawsuit's gone on long before the pandemic, and whether you agree or disagree with it, I think everybody has a right to fight for liberty and freedom. If they feel there being questions about they don't have the freedom to pick the healthcare of their choice, if they're having an argument that maybe they, from a religious point of view, do not want to pay for abortion or being forced to, maybe they have a point from others. Anybody has a right in this country to challenge and stand for their freedom, so I don't think that is wrong. An individual mandate in others. I think Republicans can easily defend it because Republicans believe in protecting those essential rights of individuals, but also believe in a healthcare system that works for individuals, that won't take things away from them, providing those essential cares for them. And there's nothing wrong with having a debate about healthcare. And it's not Republicans who have to defend it. The only Democratic Party right now that is running for president doesn't support Obamacare. They want Medicare for all. So, I mean, it's almost both parties have rejected Obamacare and think there's a better path and a better method to go forward. So, even if I disagree with a person, but they're arguing for their own freedoms, yeah, they have a right to go to court for that.
Thank you. This next questioner says, we are a homeless service provider in your district and across the state. We are concerned about the lack of a deal on evictions and unemployment insurance that could lead to a surge in homelessness. What are your plans to handle this?
Yeah, I'm concerned by that too. That was one of the discussions we were having with the new COVID package. Unfortunately, we're not in session. If I got to be speaker, I'd call us back and make this happen. I know the president has tried from executive order, but you've got Article 1. There's certain things he can or cannot do. He can do it if it's a federal. If you're working this in my district, I thank you for that. I've had a lot of different symposiums. I think one of the best leaders on homelessness, I would say, is Kevin Faulkner in San Diego. We've had him up working with our own mayor. And Karen in Bakersfield, our mayor, has done a tremendous job here. We're actually working together with the city and county, with our health facilities, with our education facilities, because I think homelessness is probably one of the #1 issues in California. But a lot of this happens to be driven. You'll know more than half of it is coming from drugs. The way we're treating people, can they still get treatments? Unfortunately, sometimes people are getting treated in jail and they're not having that ability. We've got a challenge when it comes to not just drugs, but the ability to affordability. California has become very tough to be affordable, and mental health is one of the biggest ones. And in the middle of COVID, mental health is continuing to grow. We've watched and we've had friends that are probably belonging to this group that have committed suicide during this time frame. So we have a lot of work to do. So we should be back in session. I agree with your questionnaire that we should be back and dealing with this.
Thank you. There is significant concern about how we fire back up the nation's research enterprise, which has been badly affected by COVID-19, particularly at colleges and universities. Do you expect the next emergency spending bill to fund federal research agencies enough to allow them to restart the research enterprise and thus California's economic engine?
Yeah, that's one of the major reasons why I did not support the Democrat bill. It actually mentioned cannabis more than jobs or research. I was actually proud of when I was majority leader that we increased the funding for NIH and CDC by almost an average of 40%. We created the infectious disease whole unit at a time. We cannot go wrong by investing more into research, especially if we want to stay ahead of China and everybody else. And I'm a firm believer, it's a combination, not just in investing in research and others, but when we have some of these brightest minds from around the world coming to America and educating themselves, I think we should have an immigration system that allows them to become an American. And I think that would help us at the same time in the prospect. So there's a common sense and a common ground of things that we can do and should be doing. That's why it's essential that Congress should be meeting right now. I mean, I've watched so many other essential workers, I mean, from the medical community, from even our grocery stores and others, for the idea that for the first time in the history of America, the leadership in Congress does not think they should meet. The Senate still does, but not in Congress.
Jessica, if I may, just to clarify the question, talk about research more broadly, but specifically research capacities in universities around the state and around the country. So going back to the conversation we were having earlier, you're comfortable that the amount of money for higher ed in the Republican COVID relief proposal will allow sufficient financial resources for that research capacity at our universities to continue.
Oh, very much so. Remember what we have. We also have, as you're sitting here wondering about, is there enough money? There is $1 trillion that is appropriated already that hasn't gone out, that is sitting there. There's more than $100 billion for states. There's more than $100 billion for small business. The idea that you cannot write a bill unless somebody agrees to so many trillions of dollars is the wrong way to write it. Now that states have opened back up, now that we've gone through COVID for a part, we have better data to understand what do we need to invest in. I've watched school after school. I watched Georgetown spend millions of dollars to get prepared to open up, and then the mayor tell them they could not. Georgetown felt they were prepared, that they did the work. There's going to be a lot of universities like that, and they spent a great deal amount of money. Now we could do two different things. I can do a tax incentive in there or a tax credit that lets somebody write off. I've got money in there for education down to the lowest of school districts so they can prepare, because not every school district's the same, even in my district, from the wealth of the others. They have done most of this work already preparing. They've already spent the outlays. And what is Congress doing? They're not meeting. They're not even in session. And we're going to be called back for one day on a postal bill that there is no more an issue about, that we haven't even read or seen. I think everybody would care more about education.
Thank you. There was an article in Science News suggesting that California could face heat events by the end of the century 30 times worse than today. However, your administration continues to roll back environmental regulations, over 100 so far. What do you see as a path to eliminating harmful carbon emissions in order to preserve our environment for future generations?
That is a great question. And I want everybody to sit back and listen, because everybody should be concerned about the environment. We should also measure and look at the environment in a global way. Because what the Paris Accord does, it allows China to continue and continue to cause a great deal of carbon dioxide going into the air and not be held harmless. America has actually lowered our CO2 emissions. They're polluting and we're lowering our CO2 emissions. We've also become energy independent at the same time we're doing it. When I watch Europe build another pipeline for natural gas from Russia, do you know the natural gas from America is 42% cleaner than the natural gas from Russia? When I watch us deny, do you know in America Day on the East Coast, they actually import natural gas from Russia in when America's cleaner? And we can export now. So we can make the world safer. Now let's think of some basic things that we can do if we care about the environment. And the first thing we care about is capturing carbon dioxide. You know the greatest thing we could do is to plant 1 trillion trees in the world. A tree is the lung of the earth. Teddy Roosevelt told us that, right? What does it do? It takes in CO2 and releases oxygen. If you have something wood, that wood shelf behind you, that's captured carbon for the last 50 years. If we did 1 trillion trees, that's the equivalent of taking out all the CO2 from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or 2/3 of all of it, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to today. in California, we have beautiful oceans and we're worried about the plastics in it. Do you know that 90% of all the plastic that goes to the ocean from rivers comes from 10 rivers in the world? They're not in America, but why don't we use our foreign aid to go into those countries and clean those rivers up? Why don't we enhance our ability to have cleaner emissions? We have the ability now to actually suck the carbon out of the air, use it for our own energy production. They're doing it in Texas today. So there are so many ways to go about doing this while still protecting our environment, but enhancing our economy. But if we're going to allow China and India to continue to pollute at a different standard and try to just punish us, we're wrong about that. We're not going to clean it up if we do that. And that's why I think people should look at really what the Republicans have offered.
Thank you. Given Canada's partnership with us on all things defense since World War I, do you agree with the reimposition of aluminum tariffs under the definition of a threat to national security?
I have concerns about the tariffs about aluminum. I think our USMCA agreement is fantastic. I think what the president has done to modernizing NAFTA is very important. If I was in a business today and I had one of them in China, I would get out of China first and foremost. But I wouldn't move to Vietnam or somewhere else. I would move to North America, to Canada, America, or Mexico. The USMCA is the newest, strongest trade agreement, and you have a much better economy from all. Even in the middle of COVID, you still could have trucked something back and forth. And I think that only builds to the strength of what this administration was able to do when most people said they could not. And we'll continue to build, but we have to continue to watch because, yes, even though a country is our ally, they will flood a market to control an industry or not, and we have to be willing to stand up to it.
Thank you. Why is there opposition to absentee ballots, as it appears that it is the bipartisan solution? Why not give the option for absentee or socially distanced voting in person?
There's no opposition to absentee ballots. There's opposition to all mail ballots. If you have an absentee ballot, and this is where I guess Dan and I, because we dealt with politics for so long, people won't know the difference. If you had an old Christmas list for 30 years, would you mail everybody on that Christmas list a card, even though if you haven't talked to them, even though they moved, even though they got married and everywhere else? Or would you have an updated list? An absentee ballot actually allows anybody to request. It protects the truth in voting, that you've got some type of check with your signature and your voter registration. In California, we make it so easy that you could make one check and you could have absentee forever. I have no problems with that. I have a problem with sending everybody on a voter roll that the voter roll is not good a ballot.
Thank you. This questioner says, each party has an agenda that is shaped by its partisan ideological goals. Sometimes it seems elected officials are motivated solely by partisan ideals. To what extent do nonpartisan ideals, such as ensuring free elections, supporting basic government functions without a partisan lens, and supporting a free press factor into your party's agenda?
I would hope it would be a foundation of our agenda. I hope it'd be a foundation no matter what party you're in, the Green Party, Libertarian Party, or others. Our foundation should be really our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence. I mean, think about it. I love the idea, and I told Dan this earlier. When I think about why I was a Republican, it's also about being an American, right? And you think about if Lincoln was here and he watched the nature of where we are today, what would he tell us? I think he'd tell you to believe in the exceptionalism of this country. And I believe he would say that simply from the Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth a new nation on this continent, conceived in liberty and dedicated the proposition that we are all equal. He goes on to say, but if we fail, government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from earth. We weren't the world power, but he believed the idea of government of the people, by the people, which sustain itself. Name me one other nation ever conceived in liberty and dedicated the proposition that everybody's equal. Now, that should be the foundation of either party. Then you can argue about the size and scope of government. But today we're arguing about something much different. And this is where I have a difference of opinion. I watched people within the Democratic Party, and I know they have different parties within their own party, much as Republicans would too, but I watched this colleague of mine, Congresswoman Omar. I mean, it's really an amazing story. She's born in Somalia. She's living in a refugee camp. And the greatness of America opens up her arms, brings her in, becomes a citizen of America, but not just a citizen. She gets elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Less than 11,000 people have ever had this privilege. And instead of sitting in the House of the floor and say, we need to duplicate this around the world, she just says, we need to dismantle America. That's where we have a difference of opinion. That's where I don't think we stand on a foundation for all. So we almost are having a difference of a debate between a Republican versus a Democrat. I believe this debate today is more about a philosophy of socialism versus freedom. And there's no disrespect for one another. People are openly, Bernie Sanders is openly not a Democrat, he's a socialist. And he tells you that. So I'm not saying something of difference of opinion here. And to me, that is a much bigger battle and a belief of where to go.
Thank you so much. I know we've taken you up to the end of the hour. So Dan, I'm going to turn this conversation over to you. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you, Jessica. And thanks to all of our audience members who sent in questions. And our apologies for those questions that we didn't have a chance to ask Representative Kevin McCarthy. And hopefully he'll be able to join us again in the future to pick up where we left off. As a reminder, and this is something we mention whenever we have a guest who's active on either side of the partisan fence in politics, we do our best. Jessica, Kim, the entire team at the LA World Affairs Council Town Hall does a tremendous job of bringing in a wide range of ideological perspectives and opinions. As I mentioned earlier, we were fortunate to have Representative Adam Schiff last month. Secretary of State Alex Padilla is going to be joining us in a few weeks. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina came on just a couple of weeks ago to talk about criminal justice reform. And so we know that sometimes you'll find someone who you're really excited about, and sometimes we'll have a guest who you're very excited about too, but for different reasons. Representative Kevin McCarthy, we're very grateful though that you've taken the time to join us today. It's great to see you again. And we're grateful for your time. We're grateful for your service.
Well, Dan, thank you. And for everybody, we're going to have difference of opinion, but let's not into this country today dislike one another. Let's seek that in. I want to leave you with this, Dan. And I admire your ability to be bipartisan. I respect that. You know, in my office, I keep this painting. It's Washington crossing the Delaware. We all know the famous painting. And we know when it took place, right? Christmas 1776. But do you know who painted the painting? He wasn't there. He was an immigrant who had lived in America, Emanuel Lentz. And he painted in 1850, 1851 because he wanted to inspire Germany to have a revolution based upon the values and ideas of America. And he gets it historically incorrect because he puts Washington in a rowboat with 13 people but only shows you 12 faces. Washington crossed in a Durham boat. He has Washington in a ceremonial uniform with his hand on his chest, standing up, crossing the Delaware in the middle of the night. You look at Washington and think that man's never lost a battle, but history tells us he had never won one yet. That was our first victory when we surprised the Hessians. But when you Google this picture, I want you to look at who's in the boat. The second person's wearing a beret, he's Scottish. The person directly across from him in the green jacket is an African American. You come down the boat in the middle, in the red, is a woman, and in the very back is a Native American. I don't know if they were in that boat historically, but to the young immigrant who lived in America, that's who he believed would be in the boat. And the second to last person is this farmer, and he has his hand across his face. And it's the hand of the 13th person that nobody sees. You see, this young artist was saying, here we are, not even a nation, but an idea about freedom, and we're willing to risk everything, even though we hadn't won yet. Here's a hand. Would you get in the boat and join us? That's as true today as it was then. The waters are going to be choppy. The debates are going to be tough, but at the end of the day, let's all remember we're in the same boat together. And if we row together, we will get to the other side. The next generation will improve on the generation before it. Tomorrow will be better than today. And it's not a problem if the person across the boat from you is a different gender, a different color, and lo and behold, may have some different philosophies, but they all have one. We're all an American, and we respect one another for doing it. So I respect the Los Angeles being able to have this and have differences of debate, to have Schiff on one week and me on the other, that says a lot about your group, and it says a lot about the people who belong to you. So thank you and God bless.
Well, thank you again, Representative Kevin McCarthy, and thanks to all of our audience for joining us today. For those of you watching us, we hope you'll come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. for our regularly scheduled webinar, Politics in the Time of Coronavirus. With that, I'll hand this back over to Kim. The floor is yours.
Congressman McCarthy, we're so honored to have you here today. We've had you before, and it gets better each time. So thank you for such an informative conversation. Dan, you were a fabulous moderator as always. So thank you. And everybody tune in tomorrow for his great weekly series. For those of our viewers who have enjoyed this quality civil discussion, please contribute to keep us going on the air. You can just text the word GIVE, G-I-V-E, to the number on the screen. Give what you can. We can't do this without you. And please check out our website, lawac.org. We have a fabulous lineup of speakers and topics through the end of the year, and you can register, become a member. Please, everybody, stay safe, stay informed, and we hope to see you soon. Congressman, again, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time. We know